this first topic that we're going to talk about here has to do a little bit with both coach movement and portal movement. As we covered this story when it first popped, Charles Huff, who took the job at Southern Miss from Marshall. Marshall won the conference this year. Southern Miss was the worst team in the conference. So a lot of people are like, man, what's really behind this decision? I think we know now and we understand now it was a money thing. It was a resources thing. Southern Miss seems like they really upped Charles Huff's package over there. And we're seeing the dividends of that now, as there's been a mass exodus of players. A lot of the best players from Marshall last season headed to Southern Miss, headlined by their quarterback who's coming over there, Braylon Braxton.
It's amazing. If you really look, relatively speaking, and say who had the best portal season or who's had the best portal season, I mean, it might be Southern Miss when you really look at it, again, relative to their conference. When you're at the bottom of the conference, and then you take the coach and all the players from the team that's at the top of the conference, that is called changing your roster overnight. You look at Indiana, right, and what they did with James Madison when Coach Zanetti came over and took all his players, his best players, and took a winning program at James Madison, transported it to the Big Ten, and of course won double-digit games, made the college football playoff. So just going down the list, these are productive players at key positions that are making the move down south, starting with, as you mentioned, Pete, Braylon Braxton, 60% passer, over 1,600 yards. That doesn't dazzle you, but the 19 touchdowns to 2 INTs, almost 8 yards an attempt, one of the most efficient quarterbacks in the country. And if you're trying to transport your culture down south, you can't do it without your leader and the quarterback. Also Josh Moten, one of the most highly prized cornerbacks in the portal, had a lot of interest from Power 4 schools, 5 interceptions last year, 38 tackles. He just announced he is going to make the move down south from Marshall to Southern Miss. You're talking about receivers, Chuck Montgomery, Carl Chester, Tyshawn Chapman, Elijah Metcalf, Braylon Brown, who we watched back in high school down here in South Florida. I mean, that is your entire receiving core, all over 100 yards and over, a dozen catches, some well over that coming down. That's basically your most productive receivers. The Fosters at safety, no relation. They're not brothers, but they both are big contributors. Ian Foster, 48 tackles, 5 tackles for loss. Amir Foster, Miami Columbus guy, Pete's alma mater, 37 tackles, 2 tackles for loss, 1 sack. Another Columbus guy, Jabari Ishmael, former Miami transfer, 20 tackles, 4 tackles for loss, 2.5 sacks. JJ Hawkins, another productive edge guy. This is, I don't say a whole roster, but a big chunk of the roster moving down south. Isaiah Gibson, Corey Merrick, Ishmael Ibrahim, some depth pieces. I mean, that is a load from one school to the other. And we'll see if you're taking all the best players and the coaches from the best team to the worst team, can you go worst to first? That'll be quite an accomplishment for Coach Huff.
Well, and we're getting a comment here from Canes Cats Heat 305 that says this has to be a lateral move, maybe. And again, we covered this when the news first came out. And on the surface, yes, it looks like, man, why are you going from a team that's best in the conference to the worst team in the conference? Again, Marshall did not seem like they were willing to pay Coach Huff the same way that Southern Miss was. And if you're Coach Huff, you're looking at it like, look, man, Marshall has had some success over the years, very proud program. But what we've built here right now, this is me, this is the players. If I bring them with me, we're going to have the same success or something similar. That's what he's got to be thinking in his mind.
100%. And I wonder the buyout terms, how much that plays into it. Is it easier? You don't have to be thinking about the next job. Obviously, he's focused on making Southern Miss the best team in the conference. But do you wonder if the buyout terms are different? It's easier for him to maybe, if he does have tremendous success at Southern Miss, to get an SEC job or what have you, or an ACC job, Big Ten. So that's something to watch too. I've heard rumblings that the buyout might have had something to do with it because, a guy like Coach Huff, he's ambitious. And of course, he's focused on getting Southern Miss to first place and winning the conference, but you don't know what the future holds. One thing jumps out to me, Pete, obviously we're from South Florida, which we consider to be the hotbed of college football in terms of the high school players going elsewhere. Marshall's always been a South Florida heavy team going back to the days of Rakeem Cato at quarterback. Southern Miss not as much, although Frank Gore Jr., probably their best player in recent history, of course, from the Miami area, son of Frank Gore. So you look at this class of transfers: Braylon Brown, Broward County; Amir Foster, Miami Columbus; Jabari Ishmael, Miami Columbus. So you're starting a little bit of that flavor to Southern Miss. I wonder if they're going to recruit out of high school some of these kids that maybe were under the radar from South Florida as well.
And interesting to note for this Southern Miss recruiting class, a lot of schools in this day and age do their work with the early signing day period there on December 4th, I believe it was this year. And you look at what they did a couple days ago, as they had a huge signing class on the 23rd here for the official signing day now, right? And what they did there was 15 commits in 2 days, right? So cleaned up in the last few days here. And then, of course, the portal movement. And then, as I'm going to pull up here, Coach Huff, they've already gotten a head start on next year's recruiting class. As, excuse me, let me pull this up here. You can see on Twitter, he's having fun with it, posting the class rankings for next year already. Says, just a little Christmas joy. Santa definitely came to see the USM Golden Eagles. And, you know, he's talking his talk, man. They already have the top class in the conference. I don't think it's any I don't think it's not a surprise, but I think there's a purpose for him putting Marshall up there as well underneath Southern Miss. And you see them already with a 4-star commit and a 3-star commit for next class. So, man, this is it should be something interesting to track here. It's crazy how quickly he's kind of flipped things around, at least public perception wise, and adding talent to that roster.
Yeah, and it's been almost 13 years since Southern Miss has won a conference, at that time Conference USA. So we'll see how quickly Coach Huff can get this turned around. But I think the fact that you bring in your quarterback, right? We talked about all the other positions, which are going to help, but to bring in your quarterback, to me, expedites the process. That's a productive player who, one of the most efficient quarterbacks in the country, and is going to be throwing to a familiar cast of receivers.